Hello, I'm Dr. Shani Somara, and thank you for joining me live for this very special discussion on how teaching automation in schools, colleges, and universities can help shape the workers of tomorrow. ABB Robotics have put together a panel of experts in this field, and they'll be joining me very soon. But first, why is this such an important topic of conversation? Well, put simply, automation is set to transform the world of work. Many traditional roles will cease to exist, requiring new roles to be created and new ways to be found of augmenting worker performance using technology. Around 60% of occupations have almost a third of activities that could be automated. And as the nature of jobs change, we need to educate young people to equip themselves with the skills needed for an automated future. So, to get the discussion underway, I'm pleased to welcome our experts. Andrea Cassoni, the Managing Director for Business Line General Industry Robotics and Discrete Automation at ABB. Professor Yolanda Light from the Division of Robotics, Perception and Learning at the Royal Institute of Technology in Stockholm, Sweden. Dr. Andrea Mizeli-Ojdanic, the Program Director of Master Robotics Engineering at the University of Applied Sciences Technicum Wien, and Professor Bernd Kohlenkerter, ABB Advisor, Strategic Research and Development Professor from the Ruhr-Universität Bochum. Thank you all for joining me today. So, Andrea C., let me start with you. What do you think the factories of the future will look like, and how can robots help to create jobs?
All right, Shini, the factory of the future will look like pretty smart because it will have to cope with pretty significant challenges. So on one side, the consumer behavior, that wants individualized product, individualized shipment, but produced with efficiency and in a sustainable way. On the other side, a big gap in manufacturing workforce. So we are already missing millions of positions in manufacturing. So the factory of the future will have lots of technologies, automation, robotics, artificial intelligence equipped tools, lots of digital tools as well, sensoring. So all this will create a factory which is smart, but which has technology that needs to be handled. And if we agree, and I think we can all agree, that robotics will shape the employment of the next 10 years. By the way, this is also what we are finding in a pretty large survey that we did recently with more than 2,300 people in education, converging on the fact that robotics automation will shape the employment of the next 10 years. Then we need to shape also the education of this workforce accordingly.
Yeah. So, Bernd, to you, how is the role of human workers changing, and what changes do you see in the future then?
Well, in production, we can see that physical work is more and more disappearing. So all that things like monotonous, repetitive work is disappearing. And work is changing more to control tasks or to monitoring tasks due to that advanced automation. And what does that mean for all of our employees? That means that the focus of work is changing to a more creative work for all of us. And in addition, we can see that work is going to be more and more location dependent, and that is even the production. And that is possible because we have expanding network capabilities. And due to that, the importance of using digital tools is given, and the use of digital tools, there will be a need of a higher qualification of our workers so that they can deal with that new technologies. And here, of course, we are facing the challenge of taking along all of our employees. So the development of appropriate trainings on the one hand, and of technical assistance systems on the other hand, is here of really high importance, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, as we move into less repetitive, labor-intensive work. Yolanda, what skills do you think people will need for the future then?
Yes, so actually, as was mentioned, the shapes and how robots will look like, or machines, there will be many different forms of machines around us, not just in factories, but all over, right? So the skills that people will need, in the same way that now pretty much everyone, at least in our generation, knows how to work with a computer or with a smartphone, it's likely that people will need, at least at the user level, to operate with different types of devices. I'm not saying that everyone will, of course, need to program a robot like this, because at the same time, research in human-robot interaction, for example, one of the aspects in my field of work is to make these machines more intuitive and easy to interact with, operate, or parameterize by humans. But we will need this notion of, okay, these are certain things that people will need to collaborate with this type of machines, for example. At the same time, I think another important aspect is for people to understand the possibilities and limitations of this type of machines for many reasons. For example, safety or to avoid deception, but understanding what robots cannot do, how fast they can go, these type of things will help to create a safer and more trustworthy environment between humans and machines that we might need to see in many aspects of our daily and work lives in the future.
It's really interesting to think that there are so many more things that need to be taught, not just coding. So, Andrea, to you, how do you see education changing as automation advances?
Well, as automation advances, it not only has a tremendous impact across industries, but also, of course, on education. It is actually transforming the way institutions and teachers do their job, and it revolutionizes the way students simply learn. So from a lecturer's point of view, I have to say that all the administrative work and the management of the classroom environment and all these organizational tasks have become much easier. Like just think of the evaluation of homeworks, grading tests, managing teaching material, making progress reports, and so on. So teachers in general spend a lot of time doing non-teaching tasks, which can be pretty overwhelming. And this is exactly where automation can be quite helpful. So teachers can create personalized exams, which provide them with automated grading and results, which take a huge load off their shoulders. And this is allowing us teachers to be more productive and spend simply more time with our students. And also the exams are much more secure than regular exams on the paper, as they offer smart settings and configurations to prevent cheating. But from a student's point of view, also here a lot changed due to automation. We know all students are different and approach learning differently. So with automation, a lot of new methods were created to learn much faster and reach the academic goals in a quite individual way, like digitalized guides of textbooks, video, audio content, and customizable learning interfaces, which are making content really easily digestible by simply summarizing key points or, for example, highlighting important lesson stuff and so on. And also these platforms are great for students who are not able to attend class or who are even sitting in another country. So students who are not where these courses are simply not available in their countries. So we can say, like, in general, automation changed the lives of the student drastically. Now they can improve their achievement by personalized experience. They are also able to learn online at any time from anywhere and also get quick answers to their questions or information to their problems.
Amazing. I mean, so different from probably the way we learned at school. And it just sounds like such a fun way to be educated. Yolanda, what do you think will be the long-term benefits of teaching in this way, using teaching robots and robots in education?
So I think Andrea gave a very excellent answer on more the automation aspect. I'll focus more on the robotics application. So I think robotics applications can be useful not just for teaching actual robotics, but for being the perfect case study for students to grasp certain concepts in other aspects of computer science and particularly artificial intelligence, for example. So in the course that I teach on artificial intelligence, quite often we use examples of like, oh, a robot needs to go from point A to point B. And because students and sort of everyone from science fiction, pop culture understands, okay, how a mobile robot should work and how it needs to have some sort of like algorithm to compute this, then it's the perfect example, motivating example for explaining, for example, a planning algorithm or how a classifier should work and things like that. So it's robotics. I think it becomes important not just for people who need to know about robotics and get like their main field of study to be robotics, but for many aspects of automation as a very good case study and simple sort of like motivation for explaining different concepts compared to, I don't know, other problems that might appear a bit less interesting for students, for example, or yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting, this idea of educating students using robotics, but then at the same time kind of programming their minds to incorporate robotics into their everyday and therefore industry. I mean, that seems to be one of the major long-term benefits. Do you agree, Andrea?
Well, yes, actually educational robots, they enable students like of all ages to become familiar with and to deepen their knowledge of robotics and of course programming. But while at the same time, they learn other very important cognitive skills. For programming itself, like programming is the skill itself is a big plus for an employee. So the skill increases the likability of a successful career start and like good earnings in the future. But by using like robotics in education, students can construct robots, track how code adjustment changes their behavior. They determine what works wrong and correct mistakes. And such an experience in the lab simply develops attentiveness and accuracy. The students understand that there are no insignificant details and all their choices influence the whole project. And also robotics is a unique science combining engineering with creativity. So students design physical models and see how they perform commands. So they create products actively rather than absorb information only passively. So they turn imagination on and create something really cool. And they can also improve their problem-solving skills, approach complex assignments with great enthusiasm. And many projects on robotics are performed in groups. So they can also learn how to work in a team, be a leader in a team, distribute tasks, check whether work is done well, show speaking talents when persuading other people in their ideas or when presenting their results. And many students can also take part in many contests or hackathons where they present their robots, their products, and participation in such events also promotes community involvement and allows them to make new friends and turn education simply into a very entertaining hobby.
I mean, Bernd, Andrea just introduced some of the skills that students can learn by using robots in education. Do you see there being any other skills that students may pick up?
Yeah, that was a pretty good answer from Andrea, and let me add maybe some ideas to that. In principle, the training of young engineers, or in the training of young engineers, robots form somehow a link between information technology to mechatronics. And the students in their study, they learn those basic concepts in computer science and in mechanics in theory. And by using robots, and we, for example, have a huge learning factory with more than 30 robots where the students can train on, you have the possibility to make real experience. So you can understand the physics and the physical effects of wrong programmings, for example. You can make failures or you can make wrong assumptions, and those assumptions lead to errors, and those errors maybe destroy our machines, and sometimes we have that in our lab. Of course, that's a pity. But in the worst case, even humans can be injured. And so they learn how to work with that theory in a responsible way, because they make the experience what could happen and what can happen using robots in real production or in our facilities. So you could maybe divide that in two kinds of skills. From my point of view, that are some general skills like that so-called responsibility, as I said, and also teamwork, of course, special teamwork skills, because we, for example, offer courses in which students have to work together in teams. They have to do tasks on a robot, on a robotic system. And then we have some small teams, and those small teams have to work together and bring all their developed things together. And so they have to communicate, and the better they communicate, the better are the results of the whole programming of the robotic cell, for example. And of course, they have a general skill that comes from that is creativity, because if you have to do things in theory, most times that works. Maybe your theory is not okay, but you will never recognize that. But in that practical training, you really recognize it, and the system will not work, and then you try to find workarounds. So you're really creative working with robots. And then, of course, and that is also something Andrea already mentioned, you have a lot of specific skills you will gain, like working with artificial intelligence, for example. So machine learning is something we use training our robots, for example. So you can dig deeper into that topic. Or you learn a lot about simulation technology by simulating robots with Robot Studio, for example. Or you get in touch with control engineering or with embedded systems. So you can decide which topic is of interest for you, and then you can really dig deep into those fields and create a lot of, or get a lot of skills in robotics by using real robots.
Yeah, I mean, it's not just, again, taking the labor and repetitiveness out of tasks, but it's really developing skills which are not normally associated to robotics and technology, like creativity. But I also love this idea that this approach with robotics could allow students to develop a very new age relationship with failure and trial and error. Yolanda, when do you think we should get children to start learning using robots and automation? And how at that age?
So, because I truly believe that robots will be such a pervasive aspect of our lives in the near future, I would say as early as possible, elementary school maybe, when they start learning mathematics, a second language, or other IT competences that they start learning. And especially because there are studies showing that kids learn really by trial and error. This physicality of robots really helps them get motivated. So this goes a little bit onto the second question of like how to engage them. I think it's very natural to engage them by the fact that, well, they can try something and see how it plays out, whether it works, whether it doesn't, they can refine and so on. So I think it's important that they start from a very young age, because not all computers or all machines will look the same in the future. So it's important that they get exposed to different types of technology and to understanding a little bit of what this technology means to them as early as possible.
And I think it's not impossible to think that these kinds of technologies won't be adopted by very young children. I mean, we see them using iPads and knowing how to figure out passwords, from the age of under 5 years old. So it can be really early. A question to all of you, but I would like to start with Andrea Cassoni first. How do you think robotic automation can be used to improve diversity in manufacturing and engineering?
I think it will. I think it will a better gender balance. Historically, in manufacturing and engineering, this was very much a male world. Okay, there were relatively few women, no more than 20% on average in the past were women. Now, as you've heard, obviously the skills that are required in today's world are totally gender neutral. I mean, clearly. It was already before in the past, but probably was more a cultural thing. But when the requirement to be strong in problem solving, technical competencies, but also lateral thinking, even creativity, as we've heard, which maybe not the first skills that could come to your mind when you think of robotics, then the only important thing is that we have enough women getting into the field early on, which fortunately we're seeing. We're seeing every day. We participate in many programs for education, and over the years we've seen the population changing completely. So as we go on and we move forward, I'm absolutely convinced that the new factory will be even further supporting a better balance between genders.
Absolutely. Andrea, would you like to add to that?
Can add something to this question. Well, like as the colleagues already mentioned before, we do have an enormous problem in manufacturing in the form of a skill shortage. So we need to be preparing the next generation of science, technology, engineering, and like math professionals. And it's now about finding very creative ways to engage young minds and to direct them toward a rewarding career in robotics and modern manufacturing in general. So the industry itself should do a big part when it comes especially to attract more women and minorities to the manufacturing workforce. And this requires, of course, a great shift in the attitude. So our workforce needs to be more diverse. So a mix of gender, age, ethnicity, spiritual beliefs, physical abilities, work, and educational background. Simply making every person count, because you see things, problems, and solution completely differently depending upon what you've been through and where you're coming from and what your educational background is. So we should all be included when it comes to developing our technological future. And many companies are already like taking steps towards building a diverse and very inclusive culture.
Absolutely. Bent, can you add to that? So robotics used to improve diversity in manufacturing and engineering.
Maybe there's one additional aspect if you think about production and production environments, and if you have a look on the developments we have reached the last 5 years, especially in the field of collaborative robotics or cobots, we more and more use those robots as assistance systems, and that is of great help if you think of, for example, disabled people, and we use that in production more and more to help those people to perform their tasks, so to assist. So assistance systems, and so to help people with altered or maybe reduced performance by those robots could also be a good help to bring diversity a step forward.
Absolutely. Yolanda, can you add to that?
I don't have much to add other than, as we were discussing, how early we can introduce the topics such as robotics in education, and the more this type of technology becomes cheaper, such that all schools, not just, in high income neighborhoods or the private schools, are able to expose students to this type of technology, then in a way that improves diversity, in a way that, okay, it's not just a certain group of the population that gets excited about these things and in the end ends up choosing that as their field of study. So I think that's also another way to sort of like improve diversity in the long term.
Wonderful. Well, Andrea C., how is ABB Robotics specifically helping and supporting the education sector today? Is there any particular offering from ABB Robotics that's been supporting education?
Well, yes. First of all, we do believe that we have a responsibility, we as other automation suppliers. So responsibility to support schools, institutions in general, to help the students to get the skill set that they will need to move in a world as the one that we described, right, with agility. And so, besides supplying and supporting schools with material equipment, robots, cobots, cells, software, simulation software, which is an extremely relevant part of our, let's say, education package. We also support a lot with course material, both for students and for teachers, so to train the trainers. We work a lot with university, and in some cases for courses, in some cases to support the research activity, but we are working more and more with colleges, high schools, vocational schools, helping them to develop courses to be included in the curriculum for kids of younger age, so that then they can decide to keep going, continue to study in university, or if they want to start their career in the industry, they can do it well equipped with very pragmatic also competence and informations which are up to date. Technology evolves quickly, so it's important that companies like us support the schools, the education institute with the latest up-to-date technologies available.
So finally, a question for all of you, because we're all very familiar with robotics and the amazing things they can do, and technology is moving along at such breakneck speed. So is this the right time for schools and educational institutes to be introducing robotics courses into their curriculum? And Bernd, we'll start with you.
Yeah, it's definitely the right time to do that. And I've good news for you. We already did it. So we have basics of robot programming, for example, for students of computer science. We have a course fundamentals of robotics for mechanical and electrical engineering, and also for computer science. And most interesting, I would say, is a new course we now provide, and that is human-centered robotics. That is for mechanical and electrical engineering, also for computer science, but in addition for psychologists and students of psychology. And that is very, very interesting. So in fact, I'm giving that lecture together with a psychology professor. And what we try to do is not only have the viewpoint from a technical view, also bring in that perspective of how to communicate with robots, how can the robot communicate with us, how to create interfaces, and their psychology is a great help for us. And here the students in that class, around 30 students, have the possibility to develop those things on a real robot platform. So we have a mobile platform manipulator on that platform, and they can develop those interfaces, how to talk to that robot. So they develop the speech interface, they develop a gesture control. They have a tablet on the robot where they can provide pictures, for example, that which represent the mood of the robot. And that are all things we develop together with those psychologists, and that is of great help to bring new theory and new aspects into that development, and not only focus on the technical things like I would do as mechanical engineer, of course. So yeah, that is very, very interesting.
And Andrea M., is this the right time to be introducing robotics into schools?
It's definitely the right time and the right thing to introduce robotics courses to a curriculum. So teaching young students like the simple basics of robotics, as I told you before, offers them like a whole new world of exciting opportunities that they maybe wouldn't have otherwise. It facilitates them to learn how math, science, engineering, and technology in general work in integration. And it encourages them to develop an interest and acquire talents that are required in this job market. So it in general prepares them for the future. And especially for very young girls, it can be very important so that they can see what they're capable of, and that they develop an interest for robotics and for this whole technology in the very early ages. And all the colleagues know here, the robotics industry is developing very fast, and it requires skilled people who are equipped with knowledge about this technology, about robotics, and people who can also come up with innovative ideas that are required to develop this technology. So yeah, it is definitely the right thing to introduce robotics to every curriculum, but we should also not forget it's not just simply teaching robotics, but we should also teach roboethics, because these are also very important challenges for our future. So it's not simply the technology itself, but also the whole question when it comes to roboethics.
Thank you. Yolanda, is the time now for robotics in education?
I would say so. And on the timing part of the question, one of the silver linings of the pandemic was the amount of materials that are now online related to robotics topics, lectures, exercises, a huge development in robot simulators that can be easily used not just by roboticists or students from the robotics master programs, but also by anyone with a little bit of programming background. So all of these materials can also be picked up by educators, students from high schools, and so on, to actually develop and adapt curricula to those ages and levels, but can actually be used, and again, as a way to democratize and to provide equal opportunities for people from different communities, countries that have potential, like there are more developing countries still that are where in the past it was unthinkable to think of that, because if you need physical robots, then you need to spend more money. And as technology becomes cheaper, and the amount of these online materials can be a huge boost to introduce these type of topics in curriculums from an earlier age than just university level.
So, Andrea Cassoni, I want to go back to school. Honestly, it sounds so exciting learning about robotics, using this technology. What are your final words on the topic of when we get going? Like, is the time now?
Yes, absolutely, Shani. This is the time. It's the time for all the reasons that we've heard so far, the need of an industry, but also the support for a more inclusive world on all dimensions, a more sustainable world, thanks to automation, the reduction of waste and emissions, the spectrum and the, I would say, interesting areas that studying robotics would cover, which is not only specifically robotics, as it was said by the other panelists. So yes, the time is now. Is also the time for having a very solid alliance among a number of parties, companies like us, institutions, but also government. We must create a holistic and structured approach in teaching robotics. We must have the funding to enable this, because definitely the time is now to create the skill set that will be needed tomorrow, and actually already today.
Well, learning in the future, or even starting now, sounds so exciting. And that, on those last few words, is all we have time for today for our discussion on the future of education and automation. Thank you to our panel of experts, Andrea Cassoni, Professor Yolanda Light, Dr. Andrea Mizeli-Ojdanic, and Professor Bernd Kuhlenkurter. And a big thank you to all of you for watching online. For more information on ABB Robotics, simply head to the website below, and I'll see you next time. Bye.